People like to do dangerous things sometimes. Things like cave diving or climbing Mount Everest. Activities that pose the serious risk of ending your life with the smallest mistake. In fact, some people intentionally put themselves in danger when they really don't need to. You would assume that people would avoid doing things that are too dangerous. But for some people, the opposite is true. They do them because they're so dangerous. Most of these things can be done in ways that are less lethal, but at times people choose to abandon safety and experience them with as much danger as possible. Why? Because what fun is there in doing something if there isn't the constant threat of death looming over you? So why not go over some of the most unnecessary life-threatening situations you can put yourself in? Base jumping. Base jumping is essentially skydiving, but extra extreme and with even more danger. It's generally recommended to only try base jumping if you're already well experienced with skydiving. The big difference is that instead of jumping out of a plane, you jump off a high platform of some kind. It's called base jumping because base is an acronym for buildings, antenna, spans, and earth. Anywhere that gets high enough off the ground, really. The height of base jumps is usually 486 feet or less. It's among the most dangerous activities in the world. The exact numbers fluctuate heavily due to the multiple variables involved, but roughly 1 in 2,300 base jumps are fatal. Because there is so little time to react, base jumpers need specialized equipment differing from skydivers. Instead of having 2 parachutes, a main and reserve in case the first fails, they only have 1 parachute. The low altitude doesn't leave enough time to cut away the failed chute and deploy a new one. So if your parachute fails while base jumping, you're hitting the ground. And base jumpers only have a few seconds to orient their bodies to deploy their parachutes correctly. On top of all these other problems, they also have far fewer options on where to land. And the terrain is usually much more dangerous, as the jump spots are often next to rocky terrain or public infrastructure because of where they're located. A great option if you think there isn't enough danger in skydiving and want to add some extra risk. Free solo climbing. You ever heard of mountain climbing? How about doing it without a partner or safety equipment? Ropes to catch your fall? Nuts and bolts to create something to grip? Why use any of that crap? It just sucks the fun out of rock climbing by taking the danger out of it. All you need is a pair of climbing shoes and some climbing chalk to make your way up, where the only thing preventing you from a gruesome death are some edges in the rock smaller than an inch and the grips of your fingers. Now, if you wanted to prove you could do rock climbing without any help, you could just do free climbing, which is where you only use equipment to catch yourself, and can only go upwards using your own strength, which is essentially the same thing as free soloing unless you slip. Taking all the precautions that would prevent you from dying if you mess up, like bringing bolts to place ropes on, partners who could catch you if you fall, and the various baubles and doohickeys that lock ropes into place and attach them to rocks. But that just makes it boring, because you never feel more alive than when you're closest to death. And sure, there may be a slight chance you fall and suffer a brutal end, but you get the joy of the adrenaline rush, and the clout on social media from doing it. And as social media has shown us, putting your life in danger is always worth it for the internet fame. And many free solo climbers have paid that price, because most of them are dead at this point. It's hard to get statistics on this sort of thing because it isn't well tracked, but despite free soloing being significantly less common to where maybe 1% or less of climbers have even tried it, about 30% of all rock climbing deaths are from free soloing. But hey, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, am I right? Ha ha ha! Heliskiing. Heliskiing is skiing that involves a helicopter. Sounds pretty badass and super dangerous, right? And while it is in a lot of ways, the perception of its extremeness is admittedly a bit inflated. And as cool as using a helicopter is, it's not involved in the way you might think. See, the helicopter is more of a means to an end. It's used to get skiers to places they couldn't get otherwise. Since helicopters can get just about anywhere, they're often used to access remote locations with untouched snow. And these locations are more dangerous and unpredictable because they're completely untested. A common misconception in heliskiing is that you jump out of the helicopter into skiing. In reality, this isn't something usually done in heliskiing. But heliskiing does tend to be on much steeper slopes and have an increased risk of causing avalanches. Bringing more protective gear than regular skiing is required in heliskiing, as the chances of having an accident or getting buried in an avalanche is significantly higher. Compared to regular skiing, heliskiing requires thicker skis and adjustable ski poles to accommodate for the backcountry snow. And of course, warmer clothing for the cold. But you also need a bunch of tracking equipment so people can find you if you're caught in an avalanche. You'll need to wear bright clothing to stand out, a transceiver and probe so people can track your location down, a shovel to help dig you out of snow, and also an avalanche backpack, which is basically a big airbag you can inflate on your back. It may seem silly to have an airbag while skiing, but it actually helps pull you above falling snow because the air is lighter than it, in a way similar to how a floaty pulls you to the surface in water. While heliskiing is more dangerous than regular skiing, it mainly depends on how risky of a ski route you're willing to take. If you're experienced and know your stuff, it's rather unlikely to be fatal. And maybe that's just because skiers haven't been challenging themselves enough. Cave diving. You've heard about caving, right? Where people get wedged in small cracks they crawl into and die? The thing I mentioned at the start of the video? Well, despite what you may have heard, that actually isn't cave diving. It's just called caving. But don't worry, because this isn't that. It's even worse. You know about the dangers of caving, don't you? With all the stories of cavers crawling into crevices barely big enough to fit, only to get stuck and die a slow and painful death? How about you take that and put the whole thing underwater? That's where you get cave diving. In the simplest terms possible, cave diving is taking the challenges of caving and scuba diving and combining them. And the overlap of the two also creates new problems not present in either alone. In addition to squeezing through narrow cave passages without getting lost, you must account for the pressure your body experiences and the amount of oxygen you need. This makes it so you can't be too slow or you'll run out of oxygen. And you can't be too fast or you'll die from decompression sickness, something specifically required for cave diving as a guideline. Getting lost while cave diving is much more dangerous than in normal caving, as you need to find your way out before you run out of air. And visibility is extremely low, not just because the only light down there will be from whatever artificial lights you bring, but because sediment will be kicked up as you move through the tunnels and block your visibility. Running a line to the cave entrance is standard procedure in cave diving to prevent you from getting lost, alongside what's called the 2/3 rule, where you only go in as far as a third of your air supply will allow. That way you have enough to comfortably escape through the way you came in. There's also a few other rules about things like having the right equipment, being trained in diving, and not doing anything past your limits. And if you follow all these safety procedures, fatalities are fairly unlikely to happen. It makes me wonder though, we have solo free climbing, why can't we have solo free cave diving? Cave diving alone without a guideline. There has to be some clout chaser out there willing to try something like that, right? I guess only time will tell. Storm chasing. Storm chasing is one of the few things on this list that seems like it could have a real practical use, but it usually doesn't. Storm chasing is when someone follows some kind of extreme weather occurrence for the sake of observing it. This is often tornadoes, but it could be for any type of weather. Storm chasers can use the excuse that they're chasing storms for scientific purposes, or to relay information about deadly weather events to authorities. And while that is useful information to get, the overwhelming majority of this research doesn't need someone on the ground to actually chase the storm. There are storm spotters, who are people that watch for signs of severe weather development, usually at the behest of the government, to alert community officials in the NWS so that they can warn the public more quickly. But they don't physically pursue the storms. The people who do are usually doing so to get up-close pictures and video of the storm. And of course, for personal thrill-seeking. When chasing down dangerous weather like a tornado, it's obviously quite dangerous, but there are also many additional dangers you might not be aware of. On top of the tornado lifting you and your car up and throwing them around like a sack of potatoes, there are also the dangers of flooding, damaged roads, low visibility from things like fog, dust, rain, large hailstones, lightning strikes, and whatever crap the tornado throws around that may land on the road or you. If you know what you're doing, most of these dangers can be mitigated. Except lightning, which is an unpredictable and unavoidable hazard. The most fun kind of hazard. And all these dangers are what brought in a new wave of cloud-chasing thrill-seekers into storm chasing. Inspired by all those TV shows about storm chasing to live on the edge of death and do anything for the best shots. And if you want your 15 minutes of fame, you could jump right into storm chasing too. No need to stress about all the training and safety precautions. What do you have to lose? Your life? Whitewater rafting. Have you ever been rafting before? Ever wanted to make it a little more intense? Rafting is using an inflatable raft to travel over a body of water. Whitewater rafting is rafting that takes place over whitewater rapids, where whitewater refers to places where the water is consistently moving fast enough to be aerated, making it white. Depending on how difficult of a path you choose, whitewater rafting can be a very demanding extreme sport. It often requires multiple hard turns and quick decision making. Whitewater usually means the water is fairly shallow and runs over multiple bumps in the riverbed, so you'll need to be able to dodge them all, assuming you can see them under the frothy water. You'll also have to watch out for any irregular currents that occur due to the uneven terrain it's running over. The biggest danger that all these threats present is the potential to knock you out of your raft, which then puts you in serious risk of injury from smashing into rocks, or even getting pinned underwater and drowning. It's dangerous enough that life jackets and helmets are mandatory by law, and it's generally done with multiple other people. But depending on how much challenge you're after, you can raise the danger level to a pretty high margin, with there being more than enough rapids out there that can put your life in serious risk. So much so that many of them are illegal and will get you arrested if you get caught rafting in them. But that just means you can have both the thrills of doing an extreme sport and being a criminal evading the law. You can even up the ante by doing it in a kayak instead, which can only be done alone and requires much greater skill to control. But we've still yet to find the most dangerous sport. Volcano boarding! Alright, some of you may be thinking, all that stuff is pretty cool, but these things don't quite scratch the itch for a real extreme sport. For you people, I present something truly badass. Introducing volcano boarding, where you surf down the volcanic ash slopes of an active fucking volcano. Volcano boarding can be considered a modified version of sandboarding, which is a modified version of surfing, with all the dangers involved on an active volcano, including hot volcanic ashes, poison gas, and lava flows. And there's a non-zero chance an eruption could occur while you're there. So you may need to avoid flying magma as well. Because of the environmental dangers that volcano boarding presents, it's necessary to wear goggles and a boiler suit, which will protect you from the hot ash and rock that you'll be boarding through. And you're likely to slip and touch the ground at some point and make contact with the heated material. There are only a handful of locations on Earth where you can go volcano boarding, with the most common being Cerro Negro, Mount Yasur, and Mount Bromo. And all three of these places are active volcanoes. Out of all extreme sports, this one probably comes closest to living up to its perceived extremeness. But even with all these dangers, it still isn't the most dangerous extreme sport. Because while all these factors are dangerous, they're often quite circumstantial and manageable. This next activity, though, is deadly even to the most experienced individuals. Wing gliding. Wing gliding is the practice of skydiving with a webbed suit used to glide through the air. And while that on its own is fairly extreme, it doesn't seem to be enough to make it the most extreme sport. What makes it deserving of the title is the fact that statistically, it is the most dangerous activity in the world with a fatality rate of 0.2%. For reference, that's equivalent to 1 in 500 jumps taken. That may not seem like much, but think of it this way. If you were to start wing gliding and do so once a week for the rest of your life, on average you would die a little before 10 years had passed. And this is already with some pretty extensive experience requirements in place. People that want to jump with a wingsuit need to have a minimum of 200 freefall skydives in the past 18 months. Then they can complete a wingsuit first jump course and then do an actual wingsuit jump. And even with these demanding experience requirements, it remains one of the most deadly sports in the world by a considerable margin. It's most deadly when combined with base jumping. There aren't many statistics to determine how deadly wingsuit base jumping is specifically, but it's considered to be significantly higher when done with base jumping, so it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume it's fatal for more than 1 in 200 jumps, possibly even more than 1 in 100. The reason that wingsuiting is so dangerous is that it requires near-perfect control and reflexes, and there are several small, uncontrollable factors that can go wrong, like an abrupt change in the wind, that are unavoidably fatal, even for the most skilled wingsuit flyers in the world. And combining wingsuiting with base jumping gives the wingsuiter even less time to react. And almost all accidents that happen during wingsuiting are fatal, which is why wingsuiting is crowned as the most dangerous sport in the world. But don't forget, as a yellow sponge once said, life's as extreme as you want to make it. So why not push the boundaries of how extreme things can get even further? So what do you say, Jerry? Are you up for the challenge? Jerry? Oh.